Tonight on Nation to Nation, there's a bill being reviewed in the Senate that would restore Indian status to about 3,000 people, but witnesses say they want that bill changed to recognize even more.
We have an opportunity to do something here now, not a piecemeal later, and because this is about lives.
And the Senate is listening. Is this the end of the second generation cutoff?
It seeks to restore and replace the second generation cutoff with a one-parent rule.
Hi, I'm Karen Pugliese, and I'm here inside the Senate building because something remarkable is happening. Senators are studying a bill, S2, and it could restore status to 3,000 to 5,000 First Nations people. These are people who lost their status under old Indian Act rules. They got a university degree, they left the country, or they gave it up voluntarily. Well, here's what's happening now. Dozens of witnesses are coming forward. Leaders, advocacy groups, aunties, moms. Almost all of them told the Senate they want amendments to this bill to end the second generation cutoff.
My daughter, doesn't necessarily feel connected to her nations, and that creates harm within her life as a young person.
Remember, some of these people who suffered residential schools, day schools, they left the communities. They left the communities to hide their children, to protect their children.
If we develop our membership codes, if we say somebody is part of our membership, it should be automatic that they are status.
So what's the second generation cutoff, you ask? Well, for years, up until 1985, First Nations women who married non-status people lost their status. Now, they did get it back, but only the moms and their kids. That's the cutoff. Court cases like Sharon McIver's, she testified, by the way, forced the government to tweak the law, but it didn't fix everything.
It's out and out discrimination against Indigenous women, and everybody sits around and says, oh, well.
So if you're First Nations, you know the status laws are just a confusing mess. Sometimes cousins have different legal status, sometimes even siblings do. And that's what the witnesses who testified before the Senate committee want to see fixed. Minister Golmasti didn't write a fix for the second generation cutoff into this bill. She says this bill is meant to settle a court case affecting a smaller group. But she told the committee she's working on the second generation cutoff, but she just can't deal with that in this bill.
I have been observing the Senate. I see the work that they're trying to do. I see and respect that, yes, it's a really important conversation. There are considerations of amendments. I had been very clear when I made my announcement, when I was asked in the early part of my term, second generation is a conversation that we need to have. It needs to be legislated. This for me was the next step in my work as a minister. But I really want to stress that those people who fell within the enfranchisement frame were the ones that we had directed this bill towards, to be able to find resolve for them quickly. It is interesting to sit back and watch the work of the Senate. Of course, I really respect the position that they have. They're trying to address something. What is that pathway forward going to look like? I'm asking myself. I'm always open to collaboration. I'm always open to trying to find solution, but I have to be mindful in this first step that I took. I do have a legal deadline that I have to adhere to. There's 3,500 people who need this solution. It was a quicker one. We are moving into a space of a larger, very important conversation. What is that going to look like? I'm going to wait and see what the Senate proposes and pushes forward.
The minister promised to come back with a plan by year end, but dozens of witnesses say they want it dealt with now, in this bill. They want the Senate to change it. Coming up after the break, we're going to talk to advocates who've been working 50 years to change the second generation cutoff, and then we're going to find out what's going to happen in the Senate. Welcome to Nation. Two of the most influential voices in the fight against sex discrimination in the Indian Act came to Ottawa to testify before the Senate Indigenous Peoples Committee. At the heart of the debate, who gets legally recognized as an Indian by the federal government and who gets left out. A new bill before Parliament, S2, could restore status to an estimated 3,000 to 6,000 people. But Jeanette Corbière-Laval and Dawn Laval-Harvard say that it doesn't go far enough. They've spent more than 50 years fighting race and gender-based discrimination in Canadian law. They want the bill to include the more than 20,000 people still excluded by what's known as the second generation cutoff. They're here with me now. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
So Dawn, I said that you've been fighting this for 50 years, so from birth basically is the...
Literally, I was that baby in my mother's arms
Yes.
as she was fighting this originally during her court case back in the 1970s, the first time.
So what did you want to tell what did you tell the Senate committee today that you want them to do instead of what's in the bill?
Mainly, my message to them, and I hope they heard it loud and clear, is that it's time now in this day and age to take out all forms of discrimination and sexism in this legislation we call the Indian Act. And the impetus right now seems to be like that government of Canada wants to keep doing it piecemeal. We'll take this section out because it's obviously against the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and we'll take that section out. But let's do it right now. Just look at that Indian Act and make it viable, make it fair, and make it equal to the men and the women who have to come under the Indian Act. And that's what I would like to see.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to the Minister of Indigenous Services, Mandy Galmasi, and what she told me was she's dealing with this first because there's a court case. And it was a promise that they made to stop the court case in order to get this small group of people recognized. But she's on it, she's working with 90 groups, and there's going to have to be even more consultation than that. But she's hopeful that at the end of the year, she might have a path forward. I mention all that because, I mean, like it is kind of complicated. We're sometimes in situations with our communities where, of course, we all want our kids recognized. My son got recognized through Sharon's court case. And, so we all want our kids to be recognized, but at the same time, there's this fear that these people who are strangers to the community, who haven't been known to the community, who just perceive that there's some kind of benefit to having Indigenous status, hey, my kids can go to university for free or something, are going to show up and overwhelm the communities because they've got an ancestor somewhere. And so, I mean, I'm laying out this huge kind of conflict, but I know those are the kind of conversations that are happening, and I want to know what you say to that.
So interestingly, this argument that there's going to be people, going back hundreds of years to some ancestor 1,000 years ago, it's irrational, and it's just plain out not true, because the discrimination and the reinstating of those who had been lost their status because of the discrimination prior to 1985, that has been addressed in legislation that has already happened. So the particular legislation we're talking about right now, and a recommendation that we remove the second generation cutoff and that it's the 6-1A for all of our generations moving forward, is about addressing the discrimination that occurred after 1985. So it's only those born after 1985. So it's impossible that somebody's going to be going back generations to some fictitious parent hundreds of years ago. I mean, even the Indian Act itself was in the 1800s. So and all of that discrimination prior to 1985, that has been addressed. And we're talking about what's happening moving forward from 85. So it's a much, it's a distinct pool of people.
And Jeanette, what happens if we don't deal with this? What happens if we leave everything the way it is?
Well, what we see right now is that our communities are getting divided, because so-and-so is 6-1A, another one is 6-2, and this one is something else. So it's really confusing. And as the Commissioner on Citizenship for the Anishinaabe Nation, we've talked to our people at the community level, and we've talked to our leadership, and the message is, leave it up to us as Anishinaabe people within the Anishinaabe Nation. We know who our people are. We can trace our ancestries directly through one parent or, either parent, and that's that connection. And I don't believe that anyone who has not been part of that community or not related or not connected somehow is all of a sudden going to show up and say, we're taking over. That's not going to happen. There may be some people who have not been allowed because of the Indian Act, to be part of that community. They've been excluded. I had to deal with that for 15 years, and it's not pleasant. When this is your family, this is your community, your culture, you have your language, and your ancestors are there buried in our communities. This is who we are as a people, and that's what's important. And our leadership and our elders are saying, give us that recognition to determine who our people are. We have that inherent right, and it's been guaranteed to us, supposedly, and we would like to exercise that right. We can decide who our people are, and our communities, some of them have already done so. They're developing and creating their own citizenship laws, and it's inclusive, made for them. They know who their people are, and it's to guarantee that our communities exist next generation.
I was going to say
those
that there's some
generations.
communities that could go extinct.
Well, that's the problem.
And that's exactly it. There's
Yeah.
many First Nations now where we're seeing their 50% are 6'2" status. And the 50% that are 6'1" are my age and older. And so we're not having any more children. So those ones who are of childbearing age are the 6'2" status and won't be able to pass on to their
Yeah,
children.
and we can't keep marrying each other forever. Our babies will be born with
Right?
two heads.
Yes.
I just before we go, just quickly, I noticed that there were a lot of Indigenous, particularly a lot of First Nations people around that Senate committee. And as I've been watching it unfold, they're pretty sympathetic towards doing more. Do you think you're going to get amendments?
I certainly hope so. I think that is the message. And I think people are really starting to understand that we have an opportunity to do something here now, not
right.
a piecemeal later, and because this is about lives. This isn't just an arbitrary legal argument about
Or
different
political.
categories for political purposes. This is about children. This is those children of that grandmother I was talking to you earlier who's trying to raise her grandchildren. They don't have status, so she cannot access daycare. She can't access the health care. She's struggling to get diapers for her grandchildren, and they should be going to language programs. They should be going to nursery school so that we can work on revitalizing our language and culture and that resurgence. And there's so many of our children that are being excluded right now. They don't have years to wait. It's going to be too late for some of those, and it's not right. We have to do something right now.
Well, thank you both.
So the key message here is we must not exclude anyone. These are our people, and we want to bring them home and be part of our nation because that's who they are.
No, thank you. Thank you both for being here with me today.
You're welcome.
And we will be back with more after the break. Welcome back to Nation. As feminist Carol Hanich once said, the personal is political. And what could be more personal than the government controlling your identity? That's been the case for First Nations for years. Bill S2 is now before the Standing Senate Committee on Indigenous Peoples, and it's meant to restore Indian status to a group of about 3,000 to 5,000 people. But as we just heard, some say it should go further and eliminate what's known as the second generation cutoff. The Senate Standing Committee has heard from dozens of witnesses who say the same thing. So, are they going to do something about that? Let's find out. Joining me now is Senator Paul Prosper. He's planning to suggest some changes to the bill. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
So, Senator, I just want to say there's an unusual number of First Nations, actually Indigenous people, around the Senate table. It was really quite something to be in there and hear this bill discussed. By people who actually understand it. Having been a senator for a while, that must be a change.
It's a refreshing change in my somewhat limited 2+ years of being a senator, because you get a real feel to the history and to the issues and to the regions they represent.
And, the discussion on this bill right from the beginning started out about the second generation cutoff. I know the minister was going in trying to deal with a smaller group, but those First Nations voices, even around the table at the Senate, had a lot of questions about that, and so have witnesses. I was just curious, have you heard from any witnesses that think the second generation cutoff should not be dealt with in this bill?
There was some limited testimony, I believe, along the lines of you know, people who this bill would serve directly, enfranchised people who are getting their status back, to have that done sooner than later.
Right.
But the majority of the testimony is certainly delves into getting rid of the second generation cutoff. Rich testimony before committee in that regard.
Okay, well, I posed the question, what's going to happen? What's is this bill going to change? And I think that you've got three amendments that you want to make. Let's go through them one by one. What's the first amendment that you're suggesting?
Well, the core of it is to get rid of the second generation cutoff, which was introduced in 1985 through Bill C-31, which provides a mechanism by which, if you have two successive parenting generations through a status person and a non-status person, that two successive generations, the grandchildren will no longer have status. So it seeks to get rid of that primarily. It also looks to get rid of the 1985 cutoff, where persons born before April 17, 1985, children would have 6-1 status, but if you're somehow after that date, children would have 6-2 status, so there's an inequality there. It seeks to restore and replace the second generation cutoff with a one-parent rule. So it's a rule whereby if you have one parent, then you would have status rather than that second generation cutoff. Also, it seeks to place those reinstated individuals through the one-parent rule on their respective ban lists. And I guess another component, it sort of gives a bit of time for government to get their affairs in order, to really work with Indigenous groups and organizations to allow these changes to take real effect and to have those dialogues.
So if I understand you, let me just repeat it back to make sure that I've got it. At the end of the day, with this amendment that you're suggesting, if one parent has status, their child has status, and that goes on.
Yes, it allows for continuity of a people, of a nation, because if you look at the demographics and the trends that exist with respect to parenting between status and non-status, it's a mathematical formula which suggests that various nations and communities would be extinct, at least in terms of status.
I think you've heard some other testimony too. Some of it was very emotional. People saying they're having mental health problems because of this, and stress or cut off from their culture.
There's some really powerful testimony, and I would encourage anyone who is quite curious to check it out, because it gets the basic notions of belonging and identity and welcoming people back into their community, and children feeling we all have a sense of identity. This gets to the core of identity with respect to families and communities, and it's so key and critical to really protect that and to ensure that exists for future generations.
Yeah, it's a legal difference, but I think for a lot of people psychologically, it's a lot about belonging, right?
Absolutely. Culture, tradition, identity, they're the core features to who we are as Indigenous people.
Yeah, all those things that get cut off when you can't access your home reserve, for sure. So do you think that you'll get these passed in the bill? You can suggest them, but is there a will on the Senate committee to make those changes?
That is a key question. The evidence is strong, and as senators, we're receptive to the evidence and the testimony, and it's our role and constitutional obligation to represent regions as well as majority groups, and to ensure that sober second thought is exercised through the actions of Parliament and through the House of Commons. So I certainly hope we have that support within the Senate chamber and certainly within committee.
Okay, and I've got to ask you, when the minister appeared before Senate, she said, like she was going to deal with this. She was going to go do other consultations. She just didn't want to deal with it in this bill. Why do you feel it's important to change this bill for it to be the one that deals with it?
Government's approach has been predicated on court decisions. And so there's always sort of like a minimal sort of standard that they employ to get rid of certain injustices, discriminatory practices. And so it's always a gradual approach. What we're hearing strongly from testimony is let's finally deal with it. Let's deal with all the discriminatory practices that exist within the Indian Act and deal with it once and for all, because what we're talking about is core elements of identity and nationhood and people belonging. So this provides that opportunity for us to deal with it once and for all.
And finally, Senator, I have to ask you, most bills are introduced into the House of Commons and go to the Senate second, which would mean that you would have final say. But this one was introduced into Senate first, and then it's going back to the House of Commons. What, could they just take out all the changes and put it back the way it was?
They can. It's their prerogative. They have that ability to do so. But what I'm hoping is they're receptive to the testimony within the chamber. Certainly they'll have their opportunity to examine it through committee. The Senate is in a unique position where there's a lot of corporate history and knowledge here. This isn't our first rodeo with respect to dealing with this core and critical issue. It has existed for decades. And there's that wisdom that exists, and it's predicated on the testimony we heard. So I'm hoping that there's some receptivity to that in the other place.
Well, we'll definitely be following it. Thank you so much for being with us today, Senator.
Thank you.
And that concludes this week's episode of Nation to Nation. Coming up next week, we're talking about money, because the federal budget is coming up. Listen, Prime Minister Carney has warned that everybody is going to have to tighten their belts. What does that mean? We'll do a deep dive into it, and we'll tell you what's been added and what's been taken away. And if you missed any part of tonight's show, you can check out our podcasts at aptnnews.ca/podcast. Good night.